Welcome to the course C# and .NET Programming. In this video, we are going to see how to create custom attributes and also how to access these attributes during the runtime using the concept of reflection in the .NET framework. To start with, first we have to know what is an assembly and what is the relation between this assembly, attributes and the reflection. So whenever you compile your source code, so the source code is in the format of .cs. So when we compile using the C# compiler, you will get the intermediate language code and along with the assembly file. So assembly is nothing but the deployment unit in the .NET environment, and also it is a metadata about the program. And we can see inside the assembly the different types of data whatever you are using, and it's the metadata information and also the manifest. Manifest represents the metadata about the assembly. There are two types of assemblies we are having. One is the executable assembly and another one is the library assembly. So these assembly files get loaded during the runtime inside the memory, so when they are needed. And there are three different types of assemblies: private, shared and satellite. Private assemblies are the assembly which will be used exclusively by the single application, and this assembly will be stored in the same directory of the application where it is installed. And then shared assemblies are the assembly which will be shared with multiple applications. So the shared copy of the assembly is stored in the global assembly cache. And the last type of assembly is the satellite assembly, which is mainly used to store the localized resources which is needed for the application. And this is the assembly structure. As you know, assembly is the metadata about the program. Okay, so metadata about the program, and the assembly can be distributed in a single file or it can be distributed in multi-file. And this is the structure of the assembly. The assembly file contains the assembly metadata, which is called as manifest, and then the type metadata, the intermediate language code, and if it is referring any resources, the reference of the resources. So the assembly file will be maintained in multi-file, and that time the metadata, type metadata and the intermediate language code is maintained here. Resources maintained in a separate assembly. And then if this assembly file referring some other modules, and that module's assembly file will be get a reference inside the original file. So after executing our source code, you know you are getting the assembly file. So you want to view the assembly file. So to view the assembly file, we are having a command tool called as ILDASM, which is called as intermediate language disassembler. So by using the tool, we can view the assembly created inside the particular application. And this tool will be enabled inside the Visual Studio command prompt. So by using the Visual Studio command prompt, you type this tool command, you can able to get a window. From there, you have to select the project name and you can view the assemblies created inside the project. And now we will go with the attributes. So attributes are mainly used for the decoration of the elements available inside your code, or it provides some additional information related with your programming elements. And you can have the common attributes, that is the system attributes, and also you can create your own attributes, which is the name with the custom attributes. And the reflection or the mechanism which will be access these attributes during the runtime. So reflections mainly used to examine and manipulate the type of methods and properties available inside your code during the runtime. So by using the reflection mechanism, you can invoke the methods and access the attributes whatever we have injected inside the assembly file that can be accessed during the runtime dynamically. And assemblies, attributes, reflection, they are all interconnected. So attributes provide the metadata that will be accessed through the reflection. So assemblies contain the data types, that is the type metadata, which can be examined through the reflection concept. Next is the getType method. getType method is used by the reflection in order to obtain the type of the variables used inside the program. And this getType method is inherited by all types of informations, that is all types of variables that is inherited from the object base class. Suppose we have an integer data type. If I use the getType, it will return me the corresponding CTS, that is common type system used in the .NET framework. Similarly, you have several properties, is class, is primitive, that will check what is the data type of this particular type variable. So now this is an integer type, it is not a class, so it will return me false. So like that we can know what is the data type of the class name which is available in the particular namespace, and what is the data type of the assembly file. So like that, by using this getType, you can get the informations about the assembly file, and also you can get the information about the program components available in your coding. So to move with custom attributes and the reflection, so first you need to follow the 4 steps that to create the attributes and then access the attributes through the reflection concept. So first you need to specify the attribute usage. The custom attribute, whatever you are going to create, where it will be used in your programming component, that need to be specified in the attribute usage. This attribute usage having 3 members. The 3 members are attribute target, inherited and allow multiple. The target specifies to which element this attribute should be applicable. Inherited, if I create an attribute for one class, whether it should be inherited in the inherited class also. Allow multiple, whether the same attribute can be reused for the programming element multiple times. It can be these 2 values are either true or false. And attribute target, you have to specify the component. Either it has to be applicable to a class, method, or if I put all, it will be applicable to all the programming elements. Then create custom attributes. So whenever you want to create a custom attribute, the attribute class should be inherited from the attribute class. And within this attribute class, you need to create 2 informations. One is the properties, that is to access the private members of the class with the getter and the setter, and the constructor which contain the named and the positional parameters. So basically the positional parameters are mandatory and that will be passed in the constructor argument. And the next is the named parameter. So named parameters are optional. So if you want to access it, you use the name and access. If I don't want to access it or initialize it, it will take the default value. And the third step is applying the attribute to the programming elements. So the attribute whatever you created along with the parameter, you apply this before that particular programming element where you have targeted. And the last one is accessing the attributes through the reflection. To access, we need this type of to know the type of the programming component. Along with the type of method, we have a method called as getCustomAttribute inside the attribute class in order to retrieve all the custom attributes during the runtime by using the reflection concept. And this is the question we are going to implement in this video. That is, we want to specify the attribute usage. So that will be applicable to the class level and multiple instances are allowed to create for the attribute. And the next step, I want to create a developer attribute. The attribute name we are creating as a custom attribute is a developer attribute, okay, which contain the informations of name and level of programmer as a positional attribute. And so these 2 attributes must passed in the constructor. And the next is reviewed, which is a named attribute, which is an optional attribute. So the next is apply the attribute in the respective program component. So here the program component I have to use is the class level. And last one, you have to retrieve the attribute through the reflection concept. For that you have to use the method called as get custom attribute or attributes. Okay. So now we will see the demo. The environment I am going to use it to show the demo is the Visual Studio. So I am opening the Visual Studio. So once the Visual Studio get loaded, you need to go with create a new project. While I create a new project, I have the .NET Core and .NET Framework. So I will select the .NET Framework. Next, and then I am giving the project name, attribute demo, and then create a project. So you can see here itself we have a file called as assembly.info.cs. So these are the information, they are defaultly added, that is the predefined attributes added inside your assembly file. Okay, so if you want to create, we have to create a custom attribute, and apart from that, inside the assembly.info.cs itself, we have the predefined attributes which are already created in the .NET Framework. And you can see here, suppose I have the assembly company, so I am going to put it product, and then I will save it, and then I go here and then right click, and I can have the thing called as properties. So in this properties, I can click here and I have so this is the UI design where you can edit the values, and that is a coding part where you can integrate your attributes information. Okay, so I am going to just give product demo. Okay, so these are the predefined attributes available in the .NET Framework when we create any application. So here it gets updated. Suppose you may think that you want to retrieve these values during the runtime through the reflection concept. We want to retrieve these attributes. So we will go to the program. So already I have hard coded a code. So the assembly, I will get the executing assembly, and from that I am retrieving all the attributes available in the executing assembly. Then I will try to retrieve every attribute type, and then I try to print the corresponding values. List of attributes, I will get it, and then I will print the value of each attribute. So to import it, I need to use the system.reflection. So this namespace is mandatory if I want to use with the attributes and reflection. So I will just put with console dot, right? And now I will execute the code. You can see all the attributes retrieved from the default attributes available, and it is displaying here. So the attribute name we have changed, that is a product demo. And next thing is, I want to just show you the type of method. So I am going to create a variable int I equal to 10. Then I am going to create type t is equal to I dot get type. And then you print it console dot right line, you print the value. And you want to know whether it is a class or a primitive. So I am putting console dot right line t dot is class. As you know, integer is a primitive data type. We'll see the output, what we are getting. So the class is false. So if I print true, and I am going to put this primitive, so that time it is a primitive data type, so you will get a true. Okay, so now we will implement the custom attribute creation and along with accessing it through the reflection concept. And before going with, I want to just show the assembly file created for this particular project. So I just add one class here, sample rectangle, and I'm going to add a method void display. Okay, then I have this code along with, and I'm going to just create an object rectangle r is equal to new rectangle. So now I want to execute it, compile it. As you know, the source code get compiled, you will get the intermediate language code and along with the assembly file. So you want to view the assembly file. I have already told that you go to the Visual Studio command. Visual Studio's developer command prompt, and here I just type the command ILDASM. So it will open me a tool where I can open my project. So my project name is, I will just select my project name. My project name is attribute demo. Open it, go to the bin folder, and then you open the exe file. You can see here the structure of the assembly, that is the metadata about the assembly, that is the manifest, and then followed by the intermediate language code that your source code is converted. So you have two classes, one class is program class, another one class is rectangle class. Program class having a main method and rectangle class having a display method. So if I open it, it will have an intermediate language code. The information is available inside it. You have system.console created inside your main, and then we created an object for the rectangle and we checked for the type is primitive. So the basic information, whatever you have written as a source code, that information now viewed as an intermediate language code inside the assembly. You can see that through the tool called as ILDASM. Okay. So now we will go with how to create the custom attribute and followed by how to access it through the reflection concept. So as you know from the PPT, the first step you have to follow is specify the attribute usage with the keyword called as attribute usage attribute. So the first step, we need to create an attribute usage. So attribute usage needs 3 parameters. So we have the attribute targets. So when I use the dot operator, it will showing me all the programming elements. Now according to the question, it should be applicable to a class. Then inherited, I am not going to keep it. And then I am going to use with allow multiple is true. So the first step is over. We have specified the attribute usage. Next we have to create the user defined attribute, that is the custom attribute. As per the question, my attribute name is developer attribute. So I create an attribute which should be inherited from the attribute class. And okay. So now we need to specify 3 parameters for the developer attributes, that is the name, level and repute. So I'm going to create private string name, private integer level, and then private boolean repute. So to access these private variables outside, so I'm just right clicking and I'm going to go with the creating the getter and setter. So use the property and create the public property with the getter and setter for every variables, and go to quick action using the getter and setter, and this also right click, quick action, getter and setter. So next thing we need is the constructor. So I'm going to create a constructor public developer attribute. As I told, The named parameters are optional. The positional parameters are mandatory. So these are my positional parameters according to the question. So positional parameters need to be passed through the constructor. So I am going to pass it n and then int l. Now I am going to initialize it. So name is equal to n and then level is equal to l. And what about that named parameter? So named parameter is optional. So I am going to put some default value for it. So I am going to put it true. So the second part also over. Now we have to create the class that we have to apply these attributes. So now I am going to create a class. I am going to create two classes, okay? Or I am going to create three classes. Test1, because the custom attribute need to be applied in this programming element as a target. So class test2 and then class test3. So I have to apply the attribute. So to apply the attribute, I have to again use a square bracket and I am going to pass my attribute. My attribute name is developer and the constructor needs two arguments as a mandatory. So I am going to pass the name and the level of programming. I am not going to pass the reviewed value. If I am not going to pass, it will take the default reviewed as a true. Okay. And suppose you want to pass it, then you have to put reviewed is equal to false. And now for this class I am not going to give anything. Okay. And now I am going to keep for this as a third class. I am going to keep it and then I am going to change the values. I am not going to pass the reviewed value. And this class, maybe you think that it is developed by two developers. So I need to give another one developer here. So he is Sam and with the programming level of 14 and then reviewed is equal to false. So this only makes me the allow multiple is true. Okay. So suppose you remove this as allow multiple is false. So you see here you will get an error duplicate developer because we are not allowing multiple instances of the same attribute. So you change to true. And then for example I am creating a method here. Void display. And then I am trying to give the developer to the programming element method. Okay, so that also it is throwing an error since the developer is targeted to only class. Okay, so now the third step also over. So the first step is attribute usage, second step is creating a custom attribute, and the third step is applying the attribute to the specific programming element. So the last step we want to retrieve through the concept of reflection. So what I have to do, I have to use the type of method since this type of method will help you to know the type of that particular class or to retrieve all informations available inside the class. So I have three classes. So I am going to get the type of the first class and then type of the second class and type of the third class. So all these informations I want to do the same programming logic. So even though I pass test1 class, test2 class, test3 class, from all the classes I want to retrieve the custom attributes. So I am going to write a function so that the logic I am going to keep it as common, only the class name I am going to change it. So I am writing a function called as get attribute. So this is just to avoid the repetition of code because all the classes I want to do the same logic. So I am writing a function and I am going to pass the attributes of the function with different class names. So now it is mandatory. I need to create a function for it. So public static void, my function name is get attribute. It needs one argument, that is the type of this particular class get changed into it or passed into it. So I have to put type. So any class I will pass, it will do the same operation, getting the information from that class, identify what are all the custom attributes available, retrieve the information and display it. Okay. So now what I am going to do is, I am just going to print an information console.writeLine developer info. Developer info. I am going to display the information about each object first. So now we'll just execute and check. Yes, so I have passed 3 different classes. Now I am going to write the logic. So now I want to retrieve all the custom attributes defined in this particular class type. So to get it, we have a function called as system.attribute.getCustomAttributes. Okay, so I just put get custom attributes. Okay, so maybe in a real-time application for this single class, you may have multiple custom attributes defined. So to get it multiple attributes, you can use with get custom attribute. If I want to get only one attribute, I can use with a singular get custom attribute. Okay. So for this particular class, I want to get this information. So now it is returning an array of objects. So I have to store it in system.attribute an array with my attribute. Okay. Suppose you want to know in this particular class what are all the programming elements available. Then you have an option t.get. So you can know in this particular class what are all the constructors available, what are all the methods available, what are all the properties available, what are all the interface available. So all these informations through the type object you can able to get that information. Okay, so now we need a custom attribute, so we got the custom attributes, and now we have only one attribute, but you just think of with our real-time application. So I am going to use a for each loop, taking every custom attributes one by one. So system dot attribute, take one attribute from the my attribute, and I want to check what is the type of that attribute. Maybe I have created now developer attribute. Like that you may create bug attribute, author attribute, multiple attributes you may create it. Okay, so you want to know which attribute you want to access it now. So first you have to check the data type of the attribute, and then you do the compatible checking of that attribute and then convert to a specific data type, because we are getting all the attribute in a common attribute class called as attribute class. Okay, so you want to check the compatibility. So I am going to check whether my attribute whatever I am retrieving is a type of developer attribute. So for that I am using the is operator. I am going to check that whether it is a developer attribute. So if this attribute is a developer attribute, I try to casting it to the particular type. So how will you cast it? I am going to cast the common attribute type to the specific attribute type. After casting, you just use the console.writeLine to get all the informations from the attribute. So console.writeLine, I want to get what is the name. Okay, the first attribute is name. So I am going to check what is the name. So d.name. Similarly, I want to get the level, and then I want to get the reviewed. So change to level, and then I change to reviewed, and here also I am going to put d.level, and here it is d.review. So now we finish the code, attribute usage, creating a user-defined attribute, applying the attribute to the programming target, and then using the reflection concept, the get custom attribute, you pass the class which you want to extract the attributes, and that will be available in a common attribute class, and you take the attribute one by one and check what is the attribute you want to retrieve, that is the developer attribute, check the compatibility and cast it, and then using the object you retrieve all the values of the attribute. So now we just run it. Yes, you can see here class 1 having only one developer. The information you see here, we have not passed the corresponding. So the first class we passed the named attribute. For the second class we don't have any attribute. For the third class, the first author having the default and the second author having the named parameter. So you can pass here, check it here. The first class using all information, second class there is no attribute. For the third class it is using the default attribute. If you pass the named attribute, it will take the value. If I am not passing it, it will take the default value. But the positional attributes, it is mandatory to pass it through the constructor. I hope now you got a clear idea what is the relationship between assemblies, attributes, reflection, and how to create custom attributes and retrieve it through the reflection concept during the runtime. Thank you.